As you begin to work in Ableton, you'll want to know how to save your projects. You'll also want to understand how Ableton handles file management so that when you move a project to a different system, you won't encounter missing files and broken links. So I've just got a default set open here in Live if you're following along on your own system. And let me start off by just talking a little bit about nomenclature. So in a program like Pro Tools or Logic or Cubase or others like that, the working file or the thing that you save is referred to as a session. In Ableton Live, we instead use the word set, and you'll hear me use these words interchangeably. So when we open up Ableton, it opens up a default file from the template. And in this case, I've got a couple of MIDI and a couple of audio tracks. So if I want to save this before I continue working, I'll go up to the File menu and I'll choose Save Live Set. And that uses the key command, Command S, or Control S if you're on a PC. So I'll do that. I'm going to point this at the desktop, and I'm just going to call this Test Set. And I'll go ahead and click Save. Now, if I look up at the top of my Ableton user interface, you'll notice that it says Test Set, and then in brackets, Test Set. What's that telling us is that it has saved the live set called Test Set, and it has saved that inside of an auto-created folder called Test Set. So let me just hide Ableton here for a minute, and I'll go out to the desktop, and you can see that I've got this Test Set, and it adds project to the folder name to designate that as a project folder, and then inside that we see the testset.als, which is the actual live set file. Also, you're probably noticing that the project folder is black and it's got these things that look like clips on it, kind of simulating session view, versus the normal kind of blue folder that we see on a Mac. So this just helps us to see that this is an Ableton project. All right, let's go back into Live. Let's say I've done some work and now I want to save a different version of the set. So this time I'll go up and I'll go File, Save Live Set As. And I'll append like a V2 for version 2 onto the end of that. And this time let me go down in the Places area, and I was mentioning in an earlier video that we can see the contents of the current project by just clicking on the current project icon. And so here we can see that I've got a set named Test Set and one named Test Set version 2. Now, I want to start another project, so I go up to the File menu and I say New Live Set. It creates another default set. So now I want to save that. So I go File, Save Live Set. And I'm not paying a lot of attention. I don't notice that Ableton is going to save this inside the current project folder. So let me just call this one New Test Set. And I'll click Save. Over in the current project area in the browser, I can see that there are now 3 live set files named Test Set version 2, and New Test Set. And if I go Command H and I go out on the desktop and I look at this folder, I can see that inside the project folder, when I created that new set, it did not save it inside of a project folder. It already saw that I was inside of a project folder, so it just created a set. Now, I want to point out that this is something you want to pay attention to because it can cause you problems. Because as we record audio into this or we import audio or do different stuff, Ableton will create subfolders and it will save that stuff. And if I've got different projects inside the same project folder, it's going to commingle all of those assets, and that can be hard to separate at a later point. So let me go back into Ableton, and this time I'll go File, Save Live Set As, and I'm going to point this back at the desktop, and I'm going to call this New Test Set. And let me capitalize that, correct that mistake, and I'll go ahead and click Save. So now if I look up top, I see that I've got a set called New Test Set, and it's saved inside of a project folder called New Test Set. And if I hide Ableton and I look out on the desktop, oh, I've got 2 project folders now. And if I open up the second one, yep, there we go. I've got a project folder called New Test Set, and inside that, I've got an Ableton set called New Test Set. Now, let me do one last thing here, and I'm going to go into the Instruments area of the browser and into the Impulse instrument, and I'm just going to grab one of these presets and drop it on a track. Now, this instrument has samples loaded on these 8 pads. And it could be that if I go to a different system, that system might not have these samples on it. So I want to make sure that these samples are saved within the live project. So I'm going to go up to the File menu, and I'm going to choose this option, Collect All and Save. And this is a brilliant inclusion or feature in Ableton. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to ask me, hey, what stuff do you want me to save into the session? Do you want me to gather any files from elsewhere? That's going to be anything outside of a project folder or outside of the Ableton library. So I'm going to say yes. And it's going to ask me, do you want to save things from other projects into this project? Hey, I'll usually do that. And then it's going to ask me, do you want to save files from the user library? This is stuff that I've created and I've saved into my user library, but I pulled into this set. So I'll probably say yes to that one. And then the last one says, hey, do you want to save stuff from factory packs? That's those live packs and all that content that I've got downloaded into my Ableton library. That one you want to think about a little bit, because you might be using a grand piano instrument that's got samples for every note and maybe several different samples for every note for different velocities. And you can greatly increase the size of your project. So instead of saving those files into my project, I might freeze and flatten that track. And that's something that I'll talk about in a later video. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to save that. Now let me hide Ableton, and let's go into our New Test Set project. And we can see that it's added some new folders. There's a backups folder in there, and also there's a samples folder. And if I go into that, there's a subfolder for imported. And here are all of those samples that were used in that Impulse instrument. And there's a .aif version, and there's also another file for each one of these with .asd appended on it. The .aif is actually the sample, and the .asd is an analysis file that Ableton creates for all audio files used within a live set, so that it knows how to sync those files so everything will play together. So that includes kind of length information and the location of transients and other things like that. But those files are quite small. All right, so now you understand how Ableton's folder and file structure works. So you'll be able to save and keep your projects organized. And if you need to move a live set to another location, please remember to use Collect All and Save, and then move the entire project folder.